On Thursday, the House Oversight Committee held a hearing to examine what Arizona Republicans called an audit of the state's 2020 presidential election results. It found President Joe Biden did win Maricopa County and the state overall. But now Republicans in other states are following Arizona's example and calling for so-called audits, even in places where former President Trump won in 2020. Witnesses and the Democratic-led committee criticized the Arizona review for trying to undermine faith in elections. David Becker and Gowri Ramachandran join me now. David is the executive director and founder of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, and Gowri is senior counsel at the Brennan Center's democracy program. They both testified at the hearing earlier today. Welcome to you both. Gowri, I'd like to begin with you. Many of the witnesses testifying at today's hearing were critics of the Maricopa County audit. So what is the point that you wanted to make sure you got across during the hearing, and what do you hope Congress took away from it?
Thank you so much for having me. What I wanted to get across, and what I think I did get across, is that after 9 months and millions of dollars spent on this sham partisan review, all we got was the same kind of baseless innuendo that purveyors of voter fraud myths have been pushing for years, and that real election experts have been debunking for years. So it was a real waste of time and money, and all we got was the same thing we've seen previously, and it's very dangerous for democracy going forward.
Well, David, I want to play some of your opening statement at today's hearing. Let's go ahead and listen to that.
The tens of millions of Americans, sincerely disappointed that their candidate lost, have been targeted in a scam to keep them angry, divided, and donating. They've been fed a constant diet of lies, telling them that millions of their fellow citizens, half of them members of their own party, engaged in a massive conspiracy to deliver the election to the current president, and that none of the millions of conspirators are talking. This big lie is leading to laws in the states that make elections less secure and leading to threats against public servants who run elections. And it's led to the effort that was recently concluded by the cyber ninjas in Maricopa County, Arizona.
So we heard some of it there. David, what was your main message today?
Well, I think it was really interesting. At the end, Representative Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona, noted that even after all these months, the sides are more entrenched, more divided. And I don't know if he realizes it, but that's exactly the point. This process has not shed any light on the election process. It's only turned up the heat. And it was never designed to actually discover anything in the first place. There are ways to do real audits and good audits, and many of us have supported them. You lay out the rules ahead of time, well before the election. You have professional election administrators run them. You have transparency with both parties watching all parts of the process. None of that was done here. And so that has just led to this non-audit. Audit is not a proper thing to call it. That has really cast no light on the entire process, a process that was already verified multiple times by election officials and others in Maricopa County and throughout Arizona and throughout the nation.
Gowri, David mentions transparency. The CEO of Cyber Ninjas, the company that conducted the Maricopa County audit, did not appear at the hearing. In what way do you think he could have helped illuminate this process?
I'm not sure he could have illuminated the process unless he came clean and admitted that he was biased and not a competent person to conduct this review if it was going to have any chance of improving public confidence in elections or in improving election integrity in the future. And that's probably why he didn't attend the hearing, because he really couldn't have shed any light on this that would have led to anything but that conclusion. He was clearly biased from the start, a spreader of Stop the Steal conspiracy theories. He has acknowledged authoring a memo that was given to senators who were interested in voting against certifying the election for President Biden. The memo was full of just outlandish conspiracy theories that have been debunked. So I'm not sure what he could have added unless he were willing to come clean about why he was hired.
Well, David, Cyber Ninja's audit found that President Biden did, in fact, win Arizona, but the final report by the company suggested that some fraud could have occurred. And in fact, Ken Bennett, the former Arizona GOP Secretary of State who served as the audit's liaison, defended the process, as you know, saying that it went beyond the scope of other audits and uncovered some questionable practices. And David, I want to ask you about that. What's your response to that notion?
So first of all, I want to say the audit found nothing. It was not designed to find anything. It couldn't find anything. We already know who won the election in Arizona conclusively. All it really uncovered was that highly motivated individuals with millions of dollars at their disposal and months to run roughshod over the process still couldn't manufacture enough fake fraud to overturn the will of the voters of Arizona. I think you don't have to listen to me about the quality of the Cyber Ninjas report. I think the best voice on this has been the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, which is Republican majority. We were joined at the table by two Republican members of the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. And just in the last hour or two, they've released a very comprehensive response line by line to the allegations in the Cyber Ninjas report. And it will come as no surprise after months and months of promising that they would uncover alleged fraud. There's nothing in there. There is literally no allegations of fraud. There's no evidence of wrongdoing. There's no evidence that the election outcome was anything other than President Biden winning the state of Arizona.
Well, Gowri, you said in your testimony that these audits pose threats to democracy now and in the future. Let's listen to some of that.
But willfully ignorant, sham partisan reviews are serving up innuendo and baseless suspicion, ready for deployment by super spreaders of lies. The impact of these lies is twofold: attacks on election officials and their families now, and the fostering of systematic efforts at election sabotage in the future.
What are your biggest concerns about how these audits may affect the 2022 midterm elections, the 2024 presidential election, and elections beyond that?
My biggest concern is that the innuendo, the baseless innuendo and claims of potential fraud that come out of these reviews, that those are going to get picked up by people who have a megaphone, elected officials, people who have an interest in pushing this big lie. Those are going to get picked up, amplified on social media, and trick people into thinking that undermining the will of the voters is legitimate, trick people into thinking that actual sabotage of our elections is something acceptable. That's my biggest fear.
And David, I'm going to give you the last word here. I mean, what is your message to anyone who may be doubting the integrity of the election system because of unverified, unfounded claims of widespread fraud? And realistically, how does one combat baseless claims that are made? Because we know oftentimes the facts can sometimes serve to just cause people to dig in even further in their respective corners in their belief systems.
Yeah, it's so troubling to see what's happening to the tens of millions of particularly Trump supporters who continue to be lied to about this. Objectively speaking, I've been working in this space for about 25 years. 2020 was, in fact, the most secure, transparent, and verified election in American history, as confirmed by Trump's Attorney General, Trump's Department of Homeland Security, Trump's FBI, Trump's military. And we know this because there were more paper ballots, auditable paper ballots cast in 2020 than ever before, 95% compared to less than 80% in 2016. More audits of those ballots than ever before, more pre-election litigation to clarify the rules than ever before, more post-election litigation which confirmed the results than ever before. Election officials were heroes of democracy this past year. We should be throwing them a parade right now, but instead they're facing threats and doubts, mainly because the loser of the election can't accept the results. And I should say this is a national security issue. Our adversaries in Beijing and Moscow and elsewhere are reveling in the idea that our own domestic actors are getting our own citizens to doubt democracy as a form of government. So we need to stand firm and stand with the patriots, especially members of the Republican Party in Arizona, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and many, many other places who've been resolute in standing up for American democracy.
All right, David Becker and Gowri Ramachandran, I know it's been a long day for you both. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.